Buy $166,000 in cash flow with $0 out of pocket. Get a loan from the SBA with 10% down and buy this turnkey precision machining shop in Arizona. Purchase price is $990,000. The down payment is about $99,000. You'll take on $891,000 worth of debt. Make sure you can pay the debt from the cash flow. The debt payments are going to be about $12,400 per month. You have $17,000 left over after debt payments for the year. Next, identify the potential red flags. This business depends on one major client. After that, identify the strengths. There's lots of inventory for a $0 out-of-pocket acquisition. Go to your team to underwrite, your accountant, your lawyer, your equity partner, and maybe a due diligence company, and buy this business and secure other large partnerships to expand cash flow. So there are a lot of issues with a business like this. First and foremost, we'll talk about the small amount of cash flow you get upon acquisition. But you can acquire it with $0 down because there's a lot of equipment, so you can use equipment financing to buy the business itself. But the first thing I want to talk about with this business is the potential for government contracts. It has one big client. There's some recurring revenue from some other smaller clients, but there's one big relationship that's been around since 1985. First question I would have is, has the owner been around since 1985? If the business hasn't changed hands, and we've seen the continuance of that relationship, I would be skeptical about how well that relationship will continue under a new owner. So that's the first thing I would ask. The second thing I would ask is, are there government contracts for this business? Can I secure large government contracts nationwide for this business? Because I know that the government contract space, there are a lot of contracts that are reserved for smaller businesses, which this would qualify as, that would give revenue for that small business, but nobody ever taps into them. So A, is this a business with a lot of government contracts? And B, can I hire a team to tap into that? You write a bunch of requests for proposals, or RFPs, I think they're called. I don't know if they're actually requests for proposal, but I do think they're RFPs. And you bid on government contracts. And there are ways that you can kind of set your business up to make sure that you're getting approved for a lot of those contracts. But the government has a lot of business out there. They're probably one of the biggest buyers of goods and services from the American people. And so it's very important that you set your business up to get government contracts, especially when you're a business like this, you're manufacturing something that the government will probably use at some point in some aspect of the military or government services. So look for government contracts to diversify your client base. And then after that, because here's the thing, the biggest red flag is that there's one major client. So as soon as you buy this business, you want to diversify from that major client. So government contracts will help you do that. But then I'd probably get the top 50 clients for that number, that are like that number one client. And maybe the top 50 in a state are like one per state. Get the 50 states, 2 or 3 per state. Anyway, you find your ideal client list and you just start prospecting to them. And I would identify that client list and the probability that I secure their business in the due diligence phase. So during due diligence, I'd ask myself the one major question: how can I diversify my client base post-acquisition? And I would look into the validity of government contracts and the validity of going after the top 50 to 150 clients that are like my number one client. What are the odds that I land that contract? And how can I increase those odds? So those are just some of the questions that I would ask to address that red flag. Another thing would be, once I have that list, what are the best prospecting methods to increase the probability of, getting a successful meeting with those people? It can be an introduction, it can be direct mail, it can be a cold call, it can be a cold text, it can be a paid ad. I don't care what it is, but how do I get in front of those clients? Maybe it's a giftology gifting sequence. I don't know, but I need to know those best prospecting methods. Kind of back to what I said in the beginning, this is just a risky business. The cash flow barely covers the debt. So if you have any dip in revenue, you're struggling. Which is why I would maybe lower this to like a 3x, 4x multiple. It's $166,000 in cash flow, and you're buying it for $990,000, I think, which is probably a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7x. So I'd probably want to buy it at a 3x because it's a smaller business. Even though it's completely passive, there's too much risk if this is your first business you're acquiring. Now, if you're adding this business onto a similar operation, then you're good to go. But if it's your first business, you want to buy this at a 3x, maybe a 4x, and then put some seller financing / earnouts together so you're not financing the whole of the transaction. So if it's like, hey, I'll give you $966,000, but 50% of that is going to be earned out as the business performs. So I'm only going to take a loan out for $446,000, and I want you to seller finance the whole down payment, the whole $46,000. So then the seller is financing. I don't know if that's how earnouts work because I've never done one before, but I do know it's like they get their money as the business performs. That is what an earnout is. How that structure actually works, if it goes into escrow, I'm not sure. But I do know that you can get creative with how you structure stuff. So it's very important that you get creative with this transaction because the cash flow just ain't there to buy this how it's listed on bizbuysell.com. So again, we've got the red flags and we figured out how we're going to solve that. The red flag was one major client, and I would look to government contracts in the due diligence process. Top 50 to 150 clients like my number one client in the due diligence process, and the best prospecting methods to land those clients, whether it be networking, just acquiring those businesses who service those clients to then acquire those clients, or some sort of cold outreach method. Then I would try to restructure the financing of this. I probably wouldn't just go 10% down with an SBA loan because you're barely cash flowing. I'd probably ask for some seller finance, a bit lower interest rate, or a seller earnout that doesn't have to go into escrow. Maybe the seller retains some equity in the business and you buy a portion of the business. You lower that multiple. I don't know. I would just get creative about it because you don't want to be paying, $12,000 a month when you're making $14,000 a month. It's just not good business. Anyway, that's kind of my deep dive into the business. The biggest thing was solving that prospecting or that number one prospect issue and understanding how can I use the assets of the business, the equipment, to finance it. So taking out a loan against the equipment will probably finance some of the transaction, but how can I restructure that transaction to cash flow more, whether that be decreasing the multiple, increasing some seller financing, increasing the seller earnout, or maybe I just use the assets of the business to buy the whole business. And then it's like all of my money is going to paying off loans I have against equipment on the business, which is kind of a different thing than, just paying that money to a bank. Slightly different, not that much different, honestly, but the point still stands. I would get creative about financing this so I cash flow more, and I would solve the issue for that number one client in the due diligence phase. That's what we got for you guys today on the show. That's how I would dive into this business and think about acquiring it. It's a cool business, cool that it's passive, cool that you don't have to spend an hour or two or 5 to 10 hours, whatever it was, a week on it. But for $17,000 a year, if money was less expensive, maybe this would be a better buy. But currently, $17,000 a year for all that risk, I don't think it's worth it. But hey, it's up to you guys. Somebody's going to buy this business. Maybe not actually, because a lot of businesses go unpurchased. But if nobody buys it, you can then go to the seller and get a better deal. That's what we got for you guys today on the show. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you on the next one. And remember, we are a community of people judged not by our wealth, but by our impact.